18. Balazar had come more and more uneasy. Too long. They had been in there too long, and it was too quiet. Distantly, maybe on the next block, he could hear people shouting at each other, and then a couple of rattling reports that were probably firecrackers. But when you were in the sort of business Balazar was in, firecrackers weren't the first thing you thought of. A scream. Was that a scream? Never mind. Whatever is happening on the next block has nothing to do with you. You're turning into an old woman. All the same, the signs were bad. Very bad. Jack! He yelled at the closed bathroom door. There was no answer. Balazar opened the left front door of his desk and took out the gun. This was no Colt Cobra, cozy enough to fit in a clamshell holster. It was a .357 Magnum. Jimmy! He shouted. I want you! He slammed the drawer. The tower of cards fell with a soft, shining thump. Balazar didn't even notice. Chimidreto, all 250 pounds of him, filled the doorway. He saw the boss had pulled his gun out of the drawer, and Chimmy immediately pulled his own from beneath a plaid jacket so loud it could have caused flashburns on anyone who made the mistake of looking at it too long. I want Claudio and Trix, he said. Get them. The kid is up to something. We got a problem, Chimmy said. Balazar's eyes flickered from the bathroom door to Chimmy. Oh, I got plenty of those already, he said. What's this new one, Chimmy? Chimmy licked his lips. He didn't like telling the boss bad news, even under the best of circumstances. When he looked like this... Well, he said, and licked his lips. You see... Will you hurry the fuck up? Balazar yelled. 19. The sandalwood grips of the revolver were so smooth that Eddie's first act upon receiving it was nearly to drop it on his toes. The thing was so big it looked prehistoric, so heavy he knew he would have to lift it two-handed. The recoil, he thought, is apt to drive me right to the nearest war. That's if it fires at all. Yet there was some part of him that wanted to hold it, that responded to its perfectly expressed purpose, that sensed its dim and bloody history and wanted to be part of it. No one but the best ever held this baby in his hand, Eddie thought. Until now, at least. Are you ready? Roland asked. No, but let's do it, Eddie said. He gripped Roland's left wrist with his left hand. Roland slid his hot right arm around Eddie's bare shoulders. Together they stepped back through the doorway, from the windy darkness of the beach in Roland's dying world to the cool fluorescent glare of Balazar's private bathroom in the leaning tower. Eddie blinked, adjusting his eyes to the light, and heard Chimidreto in the other room. We got a problem, Chimmy was saying. Don't we all? Eddie thought. And then his eyes reverted on Balazar's medicine chest. It was standing open. In his mind, he heard Balazar telling Jack to search the bathroom, and he heard Andolini ask if there was any place in there he would know about. Balazar had paused before replying. There's a small panel on the back wall of medicine cabinet, he said. I keep a few personal things in there. Andolini had slid the metal panel open, but had neglected to close it. Roland! He hissed. Roland raised his own gun and pressed the barrel against his lips in a shushing gesture. Eddie crossed silently to the medicine chest. A few personal things. There was a bottle of suppository, a copy of a blearily printed magazine called Child's Play, the cover depicting two naked girls of about 8 engaged in a soul kiss, and 8 or 10 sample packages of Keflex. Eddie knew what Keflex was. Junkies, prone as they were to infections, both general and local, usually knew. Keflex was an antibiotic. Oh, I got plenty of those already, Balazar was saying. He sounded harried. What's this new one, Chimmy? If this doesn't knock out whatever's wrong with him, nothing will, Eddie thought. He began to grab the packages and went to stuff them into his pockets. He realized he had no pockets, and uttered a harsh bark that wasn't even close to laughter. He began to dump them into the sink. He would have to pick them up later, if there was a later. Well, Chimmy was saying. You see? Will you hurry the fuck up? Balazar yelled. It's the kid's brother, Chimmy said, and Eddie froze with the last 2 packages of Kevlar still in his hand, his head cocked. He looked more like a dog on the old RCA Victor records than ever. What about him? Balazar asked impatiently. He's dead, Chimmy said. Eddie dropped the Keflex into the sink and turned towards Roland. They killed my brother, he said. 20. Balazar opened his mouth to tell Chimmy not to bother him with a bunch of crap when he had important things to worry about, like this impossible-to-shake feeling that the kid was going to fuck him, Andolini or no Andolini. When he heard the kid, as clear as the kid had no doubt heard him and Chimmy. They killed my brother, the kid had said. Suddenly Balazar didn't care about his goods, about the unanswered questions, or anything except bringing the situation to a screeching halt before it could get any weirder. Kill him, Jack! He shouted. There was no response. Then he heard the kid say it again. They killed my brother. They killed Henry. Suddenly Balazar knew it wasn't Jack the kid was talking to. Get all the gentlemen, he said to Chimmy. All of them. We're gonna burn his ass, and when he's dead, we're gonna take him in the kitchen, and I'm gonna personally chop his head off. 21. They killed my brother, the prisoner said. The gunslinger said nothing. He only watched and thought. The bottles. In the sink. That's what I need, or what he thinks I need. The packets. Don't forget, don't forget. From the other room. Kill him, Jack! Neither Eddie nor the gunslinger took any notice of this. They killed my brother. They killed Henry. In the other room, Balazar was now talking about taking Eddie's head as a trophy. The gunslinger found some odd comfort in this. Not everything in this world was different from his own, it seemed. The one called Chimmy began shouting hoarsely for the others. There was an ungentlemanly thunder of running feet. Do you want to do something about it? Or do you just want to stand there? Roland asked. Oh, I want to do something about it, Eddie said, and raised the gunslinger's revolver. Although only moments ago he had believed he would need both hands to do it, he found that he could do it easily. And what is it you want to do? Roland asked, and his voice seemed distant to his own ears. He was sick, full of fever. But what was happening to him now was the onset of a different fever, one which was all too familiar. It was the fever that had overtaken him in Tull. It was battle fire, hazing all throughout, leaving only the need to stop thinking and start shooting. I want to go to war, Eddie Dean said calmly. You don't know what you're talking about, Roland said, but you're going to find out. When we go through that door, you go right. I have to go left, my hand. Eddie nodded. They went to war. 22. Balazar had expected Eddie or Andolini or both of them. He had not expected Eddie and an utter stranger, a tall man with dirty gray-black hair and a face that looked as if it had been chiseled from obdurate stone by some savage god. For a moment he was not sure which way to fire. Chimmy, however, had no such problems. The boss was mad at Eddie, therefore he would punch Eddie's clock first and worry about the other cazzaro later. Chimmy turned ponderously towards Eddie and pulled the trigger of his automatic 3 times. The casting jumped and gleamed in the air. Eddie saw the big man turning and went into a mad slide along the floor, whizzing along like some kid in a disco contest. A kid so jived up he didn't realize he'd left his entire John Travolta outfit, underwear included, behind. He went with his wang wagging and his bare knees first, heating and then scorching as friction built up. Holes punched through plastic that was supposed to look like knotty pine just above him. Silvers of it rained down on his shoulders and into his hair. Don't let me die naked and needing a fix, God, he prayed, knowing such a prayer was more than blasphemous. It was an absurdity. Still, he was unable to stop it. I'll die, but please, just let me have one more. The revolver in the gunslinger's left hand crashed. On the open beach, it had been loud. Over here, it was deafening. "Oh jeez!" Chimidretto screamed, in a strangled, breathy voice. It was a wonder he could scream at all. His chest suddenly caved in, as if someone had swung a sledgehammer at a barrel. His white shirt began to turn red in patches, as if poppies were blooming on it. "Oh jeez! Oh jeez! Oh jeez!" Claudio Andolini shoved him aside. Jimmy fell with a thud. Two of the framed pictures on Balazar's wall crashed down, the one showing the boss presenting the Sportsman of the Year trophy to a grinning kid at a police athletic league banquet landed on Jimmy's head. Shattered glass fell on his shoulders. "Oh jeez," he whispered in a fainting little voice, and blood began to bubble from his lips. Claudio was followed by Trix and one of the men who had been waiting in the storage room. Claudio had an automatic in each hand. The guy from the storage room had a Remington shotgun, sawed off, so short that it looked like a derringer with a case of the mumps. Trix Postino was carrying what he called the wonderful Rambo machine. This was an M16 rapid-fire assault weapon. "Where's my brother, you fucking needle freak?" Claudio screamed. "What did you do to Jack?" He could not have been terribly interested in the answer because he began to fire with both weapons while he was still yelling. "I'm dead," Eddie thought, and then Roland fired again. Claudio Andolini was propelled backwards in a cloud of his own blood. The automatics flew from his hands and slid across Balazar's desk. They thumped to the carpet amid a flutter of playing cards. Most of Claudio's guts hit the wall a second before Claudio caught up with them. "Get him!" Balazar was shrieking. "Get the spook! The kid ain't dangerous, he's nothing but a bare-ass junkie! Get the spook! Blow him away!" He pulled the trigger on the .357 twice. The Magnum was almost as loud as Roland's revolver. It did not make neat holes in the wall against which Roland crouched. The slug smashed gaping wounds in the fake wood to either side of Roland's head. White light from the bathroom shone through the holes in ragged rays. Roland pulled the trigger of his revolver. Only a dry click. Misfire. "Eddie!" the gunslinger yelled, and Eddie raised his own gun and pulled the trigger. The crash was so loud that for a moment he thought the gun had blown up in his hand, as Jack's had done. The recoil did not drive him back through the wall, but it did snap his arm up in a savage arc that jerked all the tendons under his arm. He saw part of Balazar's shoulder disintegrate into red spray, heard Balazar screech like a wounded cat, and yelled, "The junkie ain't dangerous! Was that what you said? Was that it? You numb fuck! You wanna mess with me and my brother? I'll show you who's dangerous! I'll show—" There was a boom like a grenade as the guy from the storage room fired the sawed-off. Eddie rolled as the blast tore 100 tiny holes in the walls and the bathroom door. His naked skin was seared by shot in several places, and Eddie understood that if the guy had been closer, where the thing's pattern was tight, he would have been vaporized. "Hell, I'm dead anyway," he thought, watching as the guy from the storage room worked the Remington's jack, pumping in fresh cartridges, then laying it over his forearm. He was grinning. His teeth were very yellow. Eddie didn't think they had been acquainted with a toothbrush in quite some time. Christ, I'm going to get killed by some fuckhead with yellow teeth, and I don't even know his name, Eddie thought dimmily. At least I put one in Balazar. At least I did that much. He wondered if Roland had another shot. He couldn't remember. "I got him!" Trix Postino yelled cheerfully. "Give me a clear field, Dario!" And before the man named Dario could give him a clear field or anything, Trix opened up with the wonderful Rambo machine. The heavy thunder of machine gun fire filled Balazar's office. The first result of this barrage was to save Eddie Dean's life. Dario had drawn a bead on him with the sawed-off, but before he could pull its double triggers, Trix cut him in half. "Stop it, you idiot!" Balazar screamed, but Trix either didn't hear him, couldn't stop, or wouldn't stop. Lips pulled back from his teeth so that his splint-shining teeth were bared in a huge shark grin. He racked the room from one end to the other, blowing two of the wall panels to dust, turning framed photographs into clouds of flying glass fragments, hammering the bathroom door off its hinges. The frosted glass of Balazar's shower stall exploded. The March of Dimes trophy Balazar had gotten the year before bonged like a bell as a slug drove through it. In the movies, people actually kill other people with handheld, rapid-fire weapons. In real life, this rarely happens. If it does, it happens with the first 4 or 5 slugs fired, as the unfortunate Dario could have testified, if he had ever been capable of testifying to anything again. After the first 4 or 5, the 2 things happen to a man, even a powerful one, trying to control such a weapon. The muzzle begins to raise, and the shooter himself begins to turn either right or left, depending on which unfortunate shoulder he has decided to bludgeon with the weapon's recoil. In short, only a moron or a movie star would attempt to use such a gun. It was like trying to shoot someone with a pneumatic drill. For a moment, Eddie was incapable of any action more constructive than staring at this perfect marvel of idiocy. Then he saw other men crowding through the door behind Trix, and raised Roland's revolver. "Got him!" Trix was screaming, with the joyous hysteria of a man who has seen too many movies to be able to distinguish between what the script in his head says should be happening and what reality is. "Got him! I got him! I got—" Eddie pulled the trigger and vaporized Trix from eyebrows up. Judging from the man's behavior, that was not a great deal. Jesus Christ, when these things do shoot, they really blow holes in things, he thought. There was a loud kablam from Eddie's left. Something tore a hot gouge in his underdeveloped left bicep. He saw Balazar pointing the mag at him from behind the corner of his card-littered desk. His shoulder was a dripping red mass. Eddie ducked as the magnum crashed again. 23. Roland managed to get into a crouch, aimed at the first of the new men coming through the door, and squeezed the trigger. He had rolled the cylinder, dumped the usual load, the duds, onto the carpet, and had loaded this one fresh shell. He had done it with his teeth. Balazar had pinned Eddie down. "If this one's a dud, I think we're both gone." It wasn't. The gun roared, recoiled in his hand, and Jimmy Haspio spun aside. The .45 he had been holding, falling from his dying fingers. Roland saw the other man duck back, and then he was crawling through the splinters of wood and glass that littered the floor. He dropped his revolver back into its holster. The idea of reloading again, with 2 of his right fingers missing, was a joke. Eddie was doing well. The gunslinger measured just how well by the fact that he was fighting naked. That was hard for a man, sometimes impossible. The gunslinger grabbed one of the automatic pistols Claudio Antolini had dropped. "What are the rest of you guys waiting for?" Balazar screamed. "Jesus! Eat these guys!" Big George Biondi and the other men from the supply room charged in through the door. The man from the supply room was bawling something in Italian. Roland crawled to the corner of the desk. Eddie rose, aiming towards the door and the charging men. He knows Balazar's there, waiting, but he thinks he's the only one of us with a gun now, Roland thought. "Here is another one ready to die for you, Roland. What great wrong did you ever do that you should inspire such terrible loyalty in so many?" Balazar rose, not seeing the gunslinger, was now on his flank. Balazar was thinking only of one thing, finally putting an end to the goddamn junkie who had brought this ruin down on his head. "No," the gunslinger said, and Balazar looked around at him. Surprise stamped on his features. "Fuck it," Balazar began, bringing the magnum around. The gunslinger shot him 4 times with Claudio's automatic. It was a cheap little thing, not much better than a toy, and touching it made his hand feel dirty, but it was perhaps fitting to kill such a despicable man with a despicable weapon. Enrico Balazar died with an expression of terminal surprise on what remained of his face. "Hi, George," Eddie said, and pulled the trigger of the gunslinger's revolver. The satisfying crash came again. "No duds in this baby," Eddie thought crazily. "I guess I might have gotten the good one." George got off one shot before Eddie's bullet drove him back into the screaming man, bowling him over like a 9-pin. But it went wild. An irrational but utterly persuasive feeling had come over him. a feeling that Roland's gun held some magical talismanic power of protection. As long as he held it, he couldn't be heard. Silence fell then, a silence in which Eddie could hear only the man under Big George moaning. When George landed on Rudy Vecchio, which was this unfortunate fellow's name, he had fractured 3 of Vecchio's ribs, and a high ringing in his own ears. He wondered if he would ever hear right again. The shooting spree, which now seemed to be over, made the loudest rock concert Eddie had ever been to sound like a radio playing 2 blocks over, by comparison. Balazar's office was no longer recognizable as a room of any kind. Its previous function had ceased to matter. Eddie looked around with the wide, wondering eyes of a very young man seeing something like this for the very first time. But Roland knew the look, and the look was always the same. Whether it was an open field of battle where thousands had died by cannon, rifle, sword, and halberd, or a small room where 5 or 6 had shot each other, it was the same place, always the same place in the end. Another dead house, stinking of gunpowder and raw meat. The wall between the bathroom and the office was gone, except for a few struts. Broken glass twinkled everywhere. Ceiling panels that had been shredded by Trecchio Postino's gaudy but useless M16 fireworks display hung down like pieces of peeled skin. Eddie coughed dryly. Now he could hear the other sounds. A babble of excited conversation, shouted voices outside the bar, and, in the distance, the warble of sirens. "How many?" the gunslinger asked Eddie. "Can we have gotten all of them?" "Yes, I think I got some for you, Eddie," Kevin Blake said from half the hallway. "I thought you might want it, like for a souvenir, you know." What Balazar had not been able to do to the younger Dean brother, Kevin had done to the elder. He lobbed Henry Dean's severed head through the doorway. Eddie saw what it was and screamed. He ran towards the door, heedless of the splinters of glass and wood that punched into his bare feet, screaming, shooting, firing the last 5 shells in the big revolver as he went. "No, Eddie!" Roland screamed, but Eddie didn't hear. He was beyond hearing. He hit a dud in the 6th chamber, but by then he was aware of nothing but the fact that Henry was dead. Henry. They had cut off his head. Some miserable son of a bitch had cut off Henry's head. And that son of a bitch was going to pay. Oh yes, you could count on that. So he ran towards the door, pulling the trigger again and again, unaware that nothing was happening, unaware that his feet were red with blood. And Kevin Blake stepped into the doorway to meet him, crouched low, a Llama 38 automatic in his hand. Kevin's red hair stood around his head in coils and springs, and Kevin was smiling. 24. He'll be low, the gunslinger thought, knowing he would have to be lucky to hit his target with the untrustworthy little toy, even if he had guessed right. When he saw the ruse of Balazar's soldier was going to draw Eddie out, Roland rose to his knees and steadied his left hand on his right first, grimly ignoring the screech of pain making that fist caused. He would have only one chance. The pain didn't matter. Then, the man with the red hair stepped in the doorway, smiling, and as Roland's brain was gone, his eyes saw, his hand shot, and suddenly the red head was lying against the wall of the corridor with his eyes open and a small blue hole in his forehead. Eddie was standing over him, screaming and sobbing, dry-firing the big revolver with the sandalwood grips again and again, as if the man with the red hair could never be dead enough. The gunslinger waited for the deadly crossfire that would cut Eddie in half, and when it did not come, he knew it was truly over. If there had been other soldiers, they had taken to their heels. He got warily to his feet, reeled, and then walked slowly over to where Eddie Dean stood. "Stop it," he said. Eddie ignored him and went on dry-firing Roland's big gun at the dead man. "Stop it, Eddie. He's dead. They're all dead. Your feet are bleeding." Eddie ignored him and went on pulling the revolver's trigger. The babble of excited voices outside was closer. So were the sirens. The gunslinger reached for the gun and pulled on it. Eddie turned on him, and before Roland was entirely sure of what was happening, Eddie struck him on the side of the head with his own gun. Roland felt a warm gush of blood and collapsed against the wall. He struggled to stay on his feet. They had to get out of there quick, but he could feel himself sliding down the wall in spite of his every effort, and then the world was gone for a little while in the drift of grayness. Thank you, everybody, for sitting down with another part of Majin reading the drawing of the three. Now that the bloodbath is over, Balazar lies dead, and Delaney is eaten up by crabs, Roland and Eddie, the only two survivors, wounded. Will they make it out of here alive before the cops arrive? And more importantly, will they remember the medicine they both probably desperately need now? Long days and pleasant nights, listener.